Welcome to Foxhole Symphony, a podcast about the transformational value of men in authentic community.
In our Foxhole, men are equipped to build relationships that foster belonging, accountability, and growth.
Stop believing the lie that you can thrive in isolation and instead
join us on the journey from broken to whole.
Welcome back to the Foxhole Symphony podcast. Sarge, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Baba Ganoush. How you doing?
Guess what, bro? This is our first episode in 2022.
It is.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, my friend. Happy New Year. It's going to be awesome.
It is. It is. And let's leave some baggage behind us where it belongs and just look forward to all the good things that we have planned, our families have planned, and God has planned for us in this new year, coming year. Absolutely.
I'm ready for that. You know, today we're gonna touch on some of that stuff. I think it'll be applicable for most. You know, as we kind of dig into our topic.
Cool. I'm excited. I don't want to give it away. So why don't we jump in and tell folks what we're going to talk about today?
So in our Foxhole, you know, people know by now, hopefully we talk about building authentic relationships that foster belonging, accountability, and growth.
Right.
Well, today we want to dig into primarily the last two, accountability and growth, which sort of go together. In many respects.
Interesting. They kind of all go with growth when you think about it.
Well, they do.
Yeah, these two definitely.
They do.
Yeah.
So one of the most challenging aspects, I think, of accountability and growth are when we've got certain blind spots. Areas we just can't see or choose not to see that become obstacles on our journey from broken to whole. And these are the things that hold us back, personally, professionally, and relationally. And in addition to being perhaps the most challenging to identify in our lives, let alone accept, blind spots are often the greatest opportunities for growth. So
Sure.
Give me some thoughts, Mark, on just blind spots in general. And do you have any that you can think of that someone helped you uncover?
Yeah, well, too many blind spots. The list is too long. But I have to be honest, in keeping with your theme from episode 3 in Caves, a fun fact about blind spots
is love
that
it.
We all have them.
Yeah.
Everyone has blind spots. God made us with blind spots. It's actually where your optic nerve comes into your eyeball. There's a little round spot that has no rods, no cones, no light. It's your blind spot. We just don't know that we have it, which is really appropriate for the theme of the conversation today. Now, I had to look that up, of course. When I thought about blind spots, the first time you suggested this, I, of course, went to the car, right? And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, I mean, it's the place where, you know, in all your mirrors, all 3 that you can see as a driver, there's a car can still fit in somehow that you might run off the road, which brings me to a fun blind spot story I just have to tell. Did you ever have one of those moments where you had your family in the car, you're in the middle lane, and you're doing everything right? You're cruising along at 75 miles an hour. People are passing you these days at 75. But there you go. You're going down. You put your blinker on. You need to get into the slow lane. You're just thinking it's time to slow down a little bit. You check your mirrors. You lean over, blinkers on, and over you go. You make it about 1.5 feet, and all of a sudden, everything breaks down. The horn starts blaring next to you. You swerve. It's like one of those stunt car moments where you see a car pull off onto the rumble strip into the side of the road. You jerk the car back over. Everybody in the car jumps up and gets whiplash. And you're sitting there going, oh my God. I mean, I didn't turn my head to look and see who was in my blind spot. And I have had that happen to me. It's where everyone in the car at this stage of my driving career kind of just looks at you like, I can't believe you did that. But it's a great example of the blind spots in our life when most people listening today think about blind spots, it's that one in the car.
Can I touch on that too?
Sure.
It just occurred to me as you were talking. I'm like, yeah, there's that little writing on the mirror too, right? That says objects in this mirror may be larger than they appear, right? So like, pretty applicable to the blind spots in our lives as well. It's like, oh, that little thing could be bigger than we think.
Right. Well, not only that, objects in mirror are larger than they appear, but wait a minute, what happened? I still couldn't see it, right? How did that car fit in that little space?
Right.
You know, like they're really with all the, think about it, cars have extra batteries for refrigerators in the car. Right. They can't figure out a way. Like I think they sell mirrors now where you have this 3D 360 view that, you know, will give you vertigo if you're trying
really?
to. Yeah, they do.
Oh, that's
There's actually an anti-blind spot.
Oh, I need that
Mirror.
I need those. Honey, next year, Christmas.
The blind spots you're talking about and that we are going to talk about today are ones for me. I build blind spots. I have blind spots for my blind spots. It's really the truth. I think mainly when I really thought about this, mainly conflict avoidance blind spots are a big one. The other one I use is when I want to file away a memory, unremember, is that a word? Put in that little dark space in the back of my brain. I just don't access it. It's memory that I just leave there. It's archival storage. And those are the blind spots that I really think about when I thought about what we were going to talk about today. And I know we'll peel that onion back together and go a little further.
So thank you for that. You know, year end or year beginnings, New Year's, they provide a great time and are often a typical time for just self-reflection. I mean, it's a time organizationally, operationally in the business world where we're planning, right? It's strategic planning, it's budgeting, we're looking ahead, but there's also a looking back. And, you know, New Year's is a time when we do that, right? We reflect on, you know, the year that just passed. And so, you know, for us personally, again, professionally, relationally, a lot of us take that opportunity to just self-reflect. And I've known a number of people, I think you included, that often choose like a word or phrase for the upcoming year based upon the last year, right? Like, was there something that, you know, I want to focus on? Is there an area of focus? And what's a word or phrase for the year that can help me do that? You're familiar with this?
Yeah. Our good friend Mo is big on this.
Yes.
And I'm waiting. He'll be calling, right? And saying to us, what's your word for a phrase for the year? And the truth is I forget my word in about 3 days. I even tried mnemonics, you know, anything creative to try and keep my word. But I thought about this a little bit. My going away word, my pack it up and leave it word is don't buy the fear. For 2021, that's where I'm staying. The first thing that came to my mind for my 2022 phrase is Entenmann's chocolate donuts. But it's something I'll never forget. Sorry, it's just a digression, but a favorite snack of mine. And I don't have one for 2022. I really haven't thought about it. But given the song we just listened to and things like Surrender comes to mind for me, and I don't want to unpack that now. Yeah. There are no muscles that I need to exercise more in my body than my surrender muscles.
Awesome. Yeah, I got to give it some thought myself. The first word that came to mind was sfogliatelle, which is a beautiful Italian pastry. So I'm kind of camped there. I've got to get off the, you know,
what
off
is that cream in them.
Well,
is it like an almond cream? Or?
It's cheese.
Citrus.
It's cheese, but it has a citrus flavor to it. Yeah.
It is one of the great snacks ever.
Oh yeah.
Just can't find them.
Finding pasticcio. Do you know pasticcio?
Sure.
So pasticcio, it's tough to find with the cheese filling. They make it a lot with the custard. I don't want the custard. I want the sweet cheese. Yeah, which is tough to find. There's a few big. Anyway, we digress big time.
By the way, Sarge obviously is showing his pedigree here. I'm Entenmann's chocolate donuts, which $3.99 at ShopRite. Sfogliatelle, you got to find a real Italian deli,
right?
Like K&S in Raritan has them like three times a year. I'm on their like text list. Sfogliatelle.
Yeah, and by the time you get there, they'll be gone. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, hate that.
So year end or New Year's, also a typical time for feedback. Right. And so we're going to dig a little deeper here. It's a typical time for things like year-end performance reviews at work. Now, if you are not in the workplace or you're retired or whatever it may be, we're going to talk about, you know, feedback in the workplace and things. I just want to urge you to stick with us here because we're going to bring this home in a little bit. And so just stick with us here, because I think there's some
Absolutely
gold here for everybody.
Sure.
And now, so Mark, you and I are both in positions that really require us to provide feedback at work. Now, when it comes to giving feedback, how do you typically approach this?
I've been in positions at work for about 30 years, that in managerial roles, over 30 years, that allowed me to give feedback. But let me just walk you through that journey fairly quickly. The beginning of my managerial career, I had the shallow feedback mechanism, right? That was, I would give positive feedback to people with the hopes of getting positive feedback back. Mm-hmm. I mean, how awful, but nonetheless, that's how I operated. It fed my addiction for the narcotic of affirmation. I've talked about that last time we were here, right? That's an addiction of mine. I want to hear that attaboy, you know?
Yep.
So, or what did I say? Good job, right? That process evolved to where, right around the time the grading, I was in corporate America at this time, by the way, big companies, and they switched the grading model and feedback model to numbers, 1 to 5. And I was like, oh, this is perfect. I can just tell the truth. Right? And I said, my evolution as a manager was, I was just going to be honest. If you were a 3, I gave you a 3. You know, there was no halves. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 was awful, you know, needs improvement.
Right.
5 was you're stellar, nothing you can do better. But assigning people a number was safe. I could hide there. But all of a sudden, I mean, talk about EQ. I know you'll talk about, you know, emotional intelligence later. 0 EQ in the number. Right? There's nothing there. Right? You gave a little feedback with your number, you wrote it down, signed off, and everything's done. Then my career allowed me a chance to work at a company for 13 years. I never had a single review.
Wow.
Right. I'm not kidding. I worked
Did you have regular feedback? Did you receive regular feedback?
0.
Okay. Well, that's helpful.
And it was
maybe that's why you lasted 13 years.
I thrived in that environment. I really did. I mean, I made a
Just
great
let me do
living.
my thing.
That's it.
Yeah.
It was close to home. There was a lot of good things about it, but I realized, and just keeping up on how the world worked, I transitioned out of that job. And I would say in the last, say 10 years or so, the way I look at that feedback mechanism is that the feedback based on performance and actually getting the person you were giving feedback to involved in that, where there was some collaboration, where you talk through the process of setting expectations, telling the truth, actually both parties. But the updated way of giving feedback for me still allowed me to manipulate the narrative a little too much. But when both people were locked in on what we were agreeing to talk about and measure them on, it just helped the conversation so much. You could hold each other accountable. It was really hard to just mail it in.
Yep.
You had achievable goals. You set the expectations. We're going to look at this monthly, look at this quarterly, look at this annually, et cetera. So obviously the more evolved position, I think, was the stronger one when it came to feedback. But to tie it into what what we're talking about today, there certainly were, I still manufactured blind spots in that process because I didn't want the conflict that came with giving the 1s and 2s back in the old days.
Right.
Hope that makes sense.
It does. It does make sense. And I think, when we talk about giving feedback, I think there's this sort of spectrum from too little or too soft, aside from, whatever mechanism people are using to provide feedback, whether it requires enormous amounts of thought or whether it's a number. There's sort of this spectrum from too little or too soft,
right,
to perhaps, too much or too hard, right? So I think on the one end of the spectrum, those that maybe are too soft potentially just struggle to be assertive in either at all or in a way that's healthy.
Right.
And then on the other side, so they hold back because they don't want to wound someone, right, and know that they have the potential to do so. So they don't go there. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are just generally, they're just coming at you. And, those folks maybe struggle to be compassionate. And so those are the two ends of the spectrum that
Right.
I've found that are kind of interesting. So with the first one, those that struggle to be assertive, they're direct reports. People that are relying on feedback from them don't get it, and that's tragic.
Sure.
Right. And on the other end, they get it and wish they never had.
Right.
Right.
And often will mirror back to the person, even if they don't do it. This is my experience. If someone is soft with me, I tend to be a little softer back.
Mm-hmm.
They're more assertive with me, either in front of them or behind their back. I want to mirror to them what they gave me, that harsh, assertive approach to how they're talking to me.
Mm-hmm.
Neither one's healthy.
Mm-hmm. So let's turn our attention. We've talked just briefly about, giving feedback. Let's just flip the coin for a second to being the receiver of feedback. Now, I think it's generally very challenging for most people to receive difficult feedback.
Agree.
I guess one question is, why is this? And, I think you've got a story. Maybe just share a little bit about your journey and what it's been like to, receive feedback, to be on that end of things.
Sure. I will tell the story of Dick Newman. God rest his soul. But the first thing that came to mind when I thought about this topic we were going to talk about is, what were some of the most important things that I felt a person needed to have if you're going to be a good receiver of feedback? Mm-hmm. One is a strong self-image. I think that just being confident, having some self-confidence in what you've done. I don't mean not braggadocio, not inflated, just that image. Another thing that's extremely important that I will admit to you, I've only learned to work on and through in the last 2 or 3 years, is understanding that God's opinion of me is the most important one. Mm-hmm. That no matter what you tell me, I really respect your opinion, mm-hmm. but I can't begin to tell you how long it's taken me, many, many decades, to realize that the most important view is one.
Yep.
And that, I know that because of the narcotic of affirmation, just wanting people to pat me on the back and staying in the sales job, as I've lamented before. But with that said, agree with you completely. Most people love giving feedback, don't like getting it so much. Not too long ago, I can remember, I was that guy that, to cut off the chance of any negative feedback, I'd say something to you like, I got pretty thick skin. Tell me the truth. Let me have it. You can't hurt my feelings. I may have said that as recently as 6 months ago, said to somebody, you can't hurt my feelings. It's a lie. You can. But
I think I've done it.
You know what? Probably, along with a bunch of other people. And
sure.
Except you might probably tell the truth too. You hurt my feelings.
You did.
Yeah.
And it was helpful.
But I thought this was me manipulating the narrative to try and get the feedback I wanted. And that was, if you challenge somebody like that and say, just tell me the truth, let me have it right between the eyes. 9 out of 10 are not going to, I think. But
yep.
Back to Dick Newman. I worked for a company called Bell Atlantic, was an offshoot of New Jersey Bell. This is the late 80s. Okay. And I was a fairly new sales guy. In this particular department, I was selling to little companies like MCI, AT&T, Sprint, the long distance carriers of the time.
At the time, I was selling popcorn for the Boy Scouts in elementary school.
Thank you. I was wondering if you were born at that time, but I wasn't going to say that. Thank you. So relatively new sales guy, and Dick Newman was a unique sales manager. Still never had a boss like him in my career, and the best manager I ever worked for in terms of what I left with. From what I walked in the door when I met him till I left 2.5 or 3 years later. Dick was that guy. He had 2 plaques in it, very little things in his room, a picture of him and his wife. And he had 2 signs. One said, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Okay, great. The other one said, it was a bigger one right behind him. It said, lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part.
One of my favorites.
I'll never forget it. I had never seen it before. I think I saw the lemons, but I put other foods in there. Lack of planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part. Okay. I Great, Dick. Good notes. I gave Dick the line. You can't hurt my feelings. Just let me have it straight. You and I will be just fine. And Dick was very straight. He was a type A on steroids kind of manager, pulled no punches, was genuinely disliked by his peers. But I came to love him for things he did for me in my career. It taught me so much. One day we sat down for a review and Dick looked me in the eye across the table. He actually, I'll never forget it. He leaned across the table and he said, he just slayed me, impaled me for poor performance. And I was hurt. He was not gentle. Mm-hmm. There were unrepeatable, bam, let me have it. And there I was in my Sears reversible jacket with the brass. It's a bad picture all around. And I remember walking out of his office with my tail between my legs. I didn't talk to anybody. I was that guy. I was like whimpering in the fetal position at my desk. A few hours later, he calls me back in the office. And I'm thinking, oh my God, like he has 2 barrels to the shotgun and he only used one of them.
Get back in here. There's more. You think you heard it all? We're just getting started.
He walks me in. By the way, the first part was with his door open.
Okay. Oh.
This time he walks me in. He closed the door behind me. He says, sit down. Like, okay. And then with a fatherly tone, he says, I did in that review exactly what you told me to do. You told me to tell you the truth. So I did. And I sat there thinking, damn, he was the 1 out of 10 that really called me. First of all, that never occurred to me that was his motivation.
Yep.
But when we left that moment, he said, would you like to adjust how we do these? I'm like, yes. And we had a chance. Dude, I'm 30 or late 20s. I'm sitting there with him and he let me have it with both barrels, brought me back in, patted me on the head and said, you sure you want to do it this way? That's why he was a great manager.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot there. And something you mentioned before as to why it's generally challenging for most people to receive feedback. Most of the time, givers of feedback generally stink at it.
Yeah.
Right. So that kind of makes it hard. I mean, they often want their pound of flesh. They want corrective behavior. Bottom line, they want something versus having the other person's best interests in mind, truly wanting them to be the best version of themselves.
Yep.
Now, in addition to that, and you touched on this just with the self-esteem, I think that's a big part of it. In our woundedness, many of us struggle in this area due to our own lack of just self-esteem, right? Or our past experiences, our wounds. So, to be productive, self-reflection, it requires honesty, which requires humility, vulnerability, and a true desire to grow. I often think of self-reflection or being a receiver of feedback in terms of self-reflection versus self-protection.
Right.
And, a spirit of self-protection, it's prideful, it's dismissive. It quickly says, that's not accurate. And, well, that's just your perception and it's wrong. Right. It sends the conversation back across the table like a tennis match, placing the blame on the giver of the feedback. Right now, Not everybody feels comfortable enough to do that, but that may be the narrative in their head. Sure. or what they're feeling. And truth be told, that's potentially a hugely missed opportunity, like we said before, about blind spots. Now, let's just say for a second that it's really hard to see the accuracy or the truth in feedback that's being presented. So I'm the receiver, I'm receiving this feedback, and I completely disagree with it. I just don't see it, right? We have some options. We can play self-protection, or we can really dig deep. We can ask clarifying questions to get specifics. We can create some pause. We can spend some time just really digging and searching our hearts for any grain of sand on this great big beach that we may be able to own. Right? Like, is there just anything there whatsoever? And then, perhaps seek other people's perspectives who will be honest with us. But, being that receiver again, there's sort of this, okay, well, what's my level of willingness to really engage the process and, see what it is that person is trying to help me see.
And what comes to mind when you're talking is that this doesn't happen. The feedback we're talking about, the giving and receiving, doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's a process to this. I'm the kind of leader, and I do this because I want it mirrored back to me. Is I'm giving little bits of feedback. I don't ever want someone to come into a review with blind spots about what I'm going to talk about. I really don't want that many surprises.
Right.
I absolutely want you to know the direction I'm heading, what I call which way is the wind blowing. Yep. I say that to my clients all the time these days.
Yep.
Hey, just getting in touch to see which way the wind is blowing. Right? Is it in my face or is it at my back?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we say in our organization all the time, nobody should be surprised at review time. In fact, review time isn't even about giving and receiving feedback. I mean, truth be told, in our organization, we don't really do that.
Right.
It's a check-in. The feedback should be happening regularly throughout the entire year. And, some wise person once said, feedback is the breakfast of champions. I don't remember exactly who it was. I think it was at a global leadership summit. I heard it, but it's true.
If the Wheaties box.
Yeah. If somebody is surprised by feedback they're getting at a review, and I'm the giver of the feedback, then I've failed them.
Right. And this translates great to real life in personal. Let's get out of the professional side of this.
Absolutely.
Right? The same feedback that you and I touch base regularly, not just about this, but our lives. That's one of the beauties of our relationship, is that we share joys and challenges, sins and prayers, right? And we kind of know what's coming, generally speaking. I mean, we have our life surprises, but we do exactly what we promote in the workplace. And that is, you shouldn't be surprised.
Yes. That said, we have a strong 15-year, very developed relationship where we've built up to that, and we've grown together through that and asked permission of each other to do those things. But it wasn't always that way, right? And sometimes we all need someone to help us, pull our heads out of our behinds and pull us aside and say, "Hey, bro, let's talk." So, we had, I don't know what your experience has been. I remember a time when you did that to me, and I think we even referenced it back in episode 1 when we talked about kind of where our relationship started. But as we were getting started, there was a time where you pulled me aside and took a risk.
Yep.
And said, "Hey man, there's some things that aren't adding up to me. What's going on?"
Yeah.
And I needed that. I needed that at the time.
While I agree with you that we do have a 15-year fully developed, male relationship, a bromance, we did start out very, very honest, mainly because of how you showed up here at the house.
That's true.
Come on,
that's true.
We were a step ahead. And I remember what you're talking about. When I pulled you aside, I did know what the risk was, but I could tell it was worth it.
Yeah.
And my hope is that I believe other men will experience that.
Yeah.
Understanding not only what we're talking about today, but there's real value in that.
There is. And unfortunately, our experiences at work may keep us from being willing to have this type of relationship and this type of back and forth of giving and receiving feedback, having hard conversations with other people in our lives outside of work because of what happened to us at work, right? So our experiences sort of dictate what we are and aren't willing to do in other areas of our life.
And I tell you what, the work part of that, hey bro, let's talk, doesn't happen that often at work.
No.
Right? That's not a language that you speak there unless you have a relationship outside of work with that person. But for me, what comes screaming out to me about this as we talk about it between men, the folks that we're hoping are listening and want to impact the most with this message, is art versus science. Mm-hmm. What we're talking about is artwork, and men are more comfortable in science. Yeah. It's lists, it's equations, it's formulas, it's right and wrong, it's black and white. That's science. Boop, nice, box, done.
Can I add an HE in front of art? and make it heart work, because it
There you
is,
go.
right? And to your point, a lot of what we do in the workplace is science. You just said earlier, there's a process we follow.
Right.
Regardless of what that process may be from one organization to another, it's pretty scientific. We in our workplace, not to go back there, but just for a second, I happen to have a partner in business where we are very passionate about seeing people thrive and flourish. It's a Christian-owned organization, and so that's what our values are based on. So there is some hard work that we bring into it, actually quite a bit. We want the best for that person, both
Sure.
at work and outside of work. So we're kind of used to it. It's just the culture we've built. But man to man, brother to brother, there are some risks, there's some challenges, there's some how-tos and how not tos when it comes to approaching one another, in a personal relationship. So you mentioned, that there was a risk. You didn't quite know what the risk was, but those are very real.
Sure.
Depending on how that other person is going to receive it, but it often is worth it. And that's where I think our approach is really critical. It's absolutely critical.
I agree. Totally. Yep.
I think that the approach, the best way to maybe put it is direct but compassionate. It's about our, just like at work, it's about our desire. What do we want to get out of this? Well, if I just really want the best for you, you're going to know that.
Right.
You're going to know that, and it's going to develop trust. There might need to be some permission asked. Can I have permission to just have a safe conversation with you? Right? Did you have that? Did you have that in your notes?
I did. That's
sorry,
right,
stealing your thunder.
No, and I didn't even share it with you. But that's a great first step when you're doing heart work. By the way, there's an episode in there. Can I add a he?
Absolutely.
Sure, you can add any he that's listening. That asking permission takes real cojones. Yeah. It really does. Yeah. That says something about where you're going. It sets the stage for an incredibly authentic conversation. And nothing could be more important. The giver of feedback has really got to look at their heart about, why am I doing this? What am I after?
Yeah. What's their motivation? And in addition to that, they better be willing to receive too.
That's how we work. It's quid pro quo in a man's world.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's biblical. It's biblical. If we talked a little bit about Matthew 7 before we hopped on to record, and it's a beautiful thing. I'll read it if that's okay. Matthew 7, 3-5. Well, it starts with.
Is this in the Bible?
It's in the Bible.
Oh, okay. All right.
I know. Stick with us. Stick with us.
Yes.
So we're talking about judging.
That's the truth.
I think it's often this Matthew 7's often misunderstood as you shouldn't judge anyone, and that's actually not what it says. If you read the whole thing, what it says is, don't judge those, outside the faith. But then it very clearly says we are to judge one another within our circle of faith once we've done our own self-reflection, right? So Matthew 7, 3-5 says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Ouch.
Yeah, planks and specks.
So if we
could write a book.
Absolutely. So if we go to our brother, let me just ask him permission. We're going to take this speck. If I have not searched my heart for the plank in my own, and maybe that's something else. Maybe there's a time of confession in there. Maybe it's ask permission, confess. I've done some heart searching. There's a plank in my own eye. This is what I've found, and I love you so much. I want to show you, something that I'm seeing, and I hope you receive it well.
Well, I think we should record that. I can't.
Hopefully,
say that any better.
It's in here. Are we out of time? We are running long.
We're good.
So that's a tough one. It's a tough one.
It is. doing that without inviting God into that conversation. One of the reasons you and I thrive is because we believe in what I want to call the supernatural catalyst. We believe.
Yeah.
And left to our own devices, left to my sinful nature, left to how I would handle this alone,
forget it.
Train wreck.
Yeah. Forget it.
Yeah.
I often say that about my marriage, just marriage in general.
Sure.
Without God at the center, I don't know how people do it. I mean, I have a wonderful, wonderful marriage, but marriage isn't easy. Right. So let's talk a little bit about that. How about at home? And we'll maybe come back to some of the other relationships, but what's this look like at home? For me, again, is there a heart of willingness? Is it even on my radar? Am I listening for cues about how I'm impacting the lives in my family? Oftentimes I'm not. If I'm really intentional about it, then yes, I do. And I am. And sometimes have asked for feedback from those in my family. How am I doing, sweetie? Like that's a
good for you. That's a good one.
I have, not often, but I have, particularly, when I know I need some accountability. What better accountability partner than our spouse who sees us at, our worst, our most natural habitat, right?
Yul Gibbons or David Attenborough. Who is it? Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh man. So, and I do think that's part of God's design for marriage is to grow us, to sharpen us, to strengthen us, and make us more like the man He created us to be, or woman.
Right. Who knows our blind spots better than our partner? Right.
Right.
Nobody.
Right.
Come on.
Right.
And I've seen you at your best and worst. They'll see things that we'll never see in one another ever.
Right. And don't get me wrong. I'm not, I'm not asking my wife weekly how I can do better. That would be far too painful. It's just inviting pain, but not that she would approach it that way, but talk about hurt feelings. Do I really want to know? Do I really want to do that? But I'll tell you what, the result is really something beautiful. It develops intimacy, deep intimacy.
Sure.
In any relationship, if both parties are coming to that conversation with a heart for the other person.
The thing that impacts those conversations the most in my home are my role changes don't always, aren't in parallel with my tone changes.
Wow.
Right? When I move from worker, leader, driver, professional to dad, husband, doer, provider, sometimes I keep, my tone doesn't match, right? And it's killed me, right? But I have gotten better at it, and it requires constant attention on my part. The tenor of the conversation here is very important. Where people will look at your blind spots, they know you have them, they know exactly where you hide them and exactly where they are, but they give you grace and say, because I approached it well, I thought about it first, and my tone now matches my role as loving husband, and I say things the right way. There's a different appreciation and a different acceptance for that. Mm-hmm. That's my experience.
Yeah, as you mentioned, roles. Husband, father, brother, son. As we bring kids into the picture, right, what's it look like to lead our children well? And I've often talked to other men about taking the opportunity to apologize to our kids for something that they may not even recognize needs apologizing for. Letting our kids know, letting my son know that, hey, that superhero you pictured when you were 4, that's not really me, right? It is a beautiful thing. But what I've learned is that God likes to use our kids like mirrors. They are mirrors, right? Especially in the years before high school, because at that time they really begin to become more sort of independent thinkers. But what I mean by mirrors is they reflect back to us certain language, behaviors, even viewpoints and perspectives that are ours. Oh yeah. I mean,
and some you really didn't want mirrored.
Well,
back
that's
to you.
just, the best is when they say or do something that really upsets you as a parent, and we respond harshly. And then all of a sudden we realize that they're literally parroting us.
Right. And somebody walks by you in the hallway and says something like, "Who does he sound like?"
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you're like, oh man, that could be painful. And then as they get a little older, they actually say things like, well, Dad, remember when you.
Sure. ...
Right. And you're like, oh my gosh.
Right. You were actually paying attention then? Wait a minute.
Right.
You ignored all this other stuff I told you.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And so again, these are beautiful opportunities that most of us want to run and hide from.
Right.
They're whether it's, again, our woundedness, our shame, embarrassment, it's painful, right? And can seem like we're weak in that moment, but a strong man takes that opportunity to be transparent, to seek forgiveness, to redirect, to pour into, right? And be vulnerable.
I couldn't agree more. And I would, thinking of how I summarized this in my head, I want to say to anybody listening today, the value of having men in your life where you can give and receive honest feedback as you're building the authenticity of that relationship. These are the conversations that are the foundational building blocks of everything that comes after it. It enables you to deal with the tsunamis of life. Is if you have these conversations that we're talking about, if you acknowledge where your blind spots are, if you dealing with each other on a peer level, regardless of what your role is, regardless of how big your house is and how sweet your car is and all your stuff and your crap, dealing with another man in an honest and authentic way enables you to have someone with you in your foxhole when the crap hits the fan, and can make all the difference in the world in how you react. And that trickles right over into how you act in your family and the relationships you have throughout your life. I believe all that.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. You mentioned earlier EQ, and we don't really have the time to dig into this, but I want to just plug for emotional intelligence. And if you don't know what this is, or you haven't dug into it, there's a lot there. And whether we are givers of feedback or receivers, working on our EQ helps a great deal. And so, Google it, look it up. Quick Google search will tell you there's 4 pillars: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And we are stronger and weaker in, certain aspects of EQ, but it's worth looking at. And, particularly the self-awareness piece, I think, just being aware of your own emotions and able to identify them, because I think controlling those in the moment of receiving feedback or giving is a really critical piece. But I think most importantly, whether you're the giver or the receiver, you'd better be honest with yourself about the data, what really happened. And Mark, you touched on this, but it would be wise to take the time to sort out your perceptions versus the perceptions of others, and spend the time to get down to the reality, the truth about the facts versus your own judgments of the other person. And if you're a giver of feedback, you'd better be sure to check your motives. We talked
Amen.
a lot about that, and leave any unhealthy ones at the door. Check the condition of your heart. What is it you're looking to accomplish by having this hard conversation? So if you want to talk to a brother about something, why is it? Search your heart and know that it's pure before you do. What is it you want? Now, if you're on the other side of the table, if you're the one receiving the feedback and you've determined that the feedback is absolutely not accurate, here are a few questions for you. 1, what do you believe about yourself? In other words, how do you view yourself? Mark, you touched on that earlier too.
Sure.
What is your identity rooted in? Or better yet, whose voice defines truth for you? Whose voice defines truth for you? Now, notice I didn't ask whose voice doesn't define truth for you, meaning the giver of the feedback, right? That's obvious. So let's not use this as an excuse to be dismissive of, hard feedback we receive and fall back into self-protection mode.
Sure.
But let's use this to effectively receive feedback. That's true because we're secure in who we are. so secure that hard conversations don't dismantle us. You said before that you and I, we approach these things a certain way because of our faith.
Right.
And because of who we know ourselves to be in Christ. And that's critical, right? So if the feedback isn't true, let's rest in the truth that we are secure in spite of what's being presented, not feeling the need to defend, but perhaps feeling grateful for yet another opportunity to examine ourselves, to examine our behavioral patterns and our hearts, regardless of what we might find. We might not like what we find, but
another episode.
What a great opportunity. We need to be doing that. We need to be. So I think, what I would like to say, perhaps in closing, is if you're unsure how to answer that question, whose voice defines truth for you, or even what we mean by that, that's okay. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
So that we can unpack it further.
Go to our website.
Yeah. Drop us
an email.
Drop us a line. Let's talk about that. And until then, know this. You are deeply loved just as you are.
Amen. What a great journey we're on. Thanks, everybody. We'll look forward to talking to you again soon. Happy New Year to you, Sarge.
Happy New Year to you, man. And let me just mention one plug for in just a couple of weeks. We've got some exciting guests coming.
That's right.
We are really excited. We are jacked. And so stick with us. Thanks for listening. And we'll be back with you soon.
In episode 4, we talked about having hard conversations, about giving and receiving challenging feedback. We learned that sometimes blind spots may be bigger than they appear, but they are also the greatest opportunities for growth. We talked about the importance of being honest about our heart motivation going into a difficult conversation and the difference between self-reflection and self-protection. We said we all need someone in our life who's willing to say, hey, bro, let's talk. But it's really important that person examine their own heart first. We also talked about how this can lead to a stronger relationship with deeper intimacy if we embrace it. And lastly, that feedback doesn't define us. So we should be asking ourselves, whose voice defines truth for us?
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it and invite others to the Foxhole. You can find us wherever you download your favorite podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you know when new episodes drop, and please rate us and comment there too, as it'll help us get found by others who could benefit. Find, follow, and like us on your go-to social media networks by searching Foxhole Symphony, or visit foxholesymphony.com to make it super easy to find us. Drop us a line with feedback, questions, topic requests, who knows? Maybe you'll be a guest on a future episode. In the meantime, prepare to move, embrace discomfort, and just be you.